If you've been following along, we've made some incredible strides towards making our first grid control in Excel. In this lecture, it's going to be a combo meal. I'm taking 2 lectures and throwing them together from our mastery course. This one, we're going to show you how you can add multiple columns, how you can take what's called the HITEM to get the item or row identifier, and how you can use that to read or write information, including multiple columns. So stick around. In this episode of Excel VBA is fun. All right, so this is going to be a really quick lecture about when you're adding multiple columns. So we're going to add another column. You remember a row or an item is the thing that keeps adding more entries here, but the columns are the left to right things at the very top. Like in Excel, we have A and then B and then C. So we're going to add another column. We have one called name. Let's do one called last, which means the last name. So we're going to create another sub. We're going to call this one multiple columns and hit enter. So it's very similar. I just wanted to show you that if you do sheet1.grid1.columns, it's exactly like the first lecture. .columns.add. You can do the word last in quotes, something like this. But what I wanted to drive home is that if you ran the one called name, if you ran the add column macro again, it would actually put another one over here. So it would have column 1 or 0 actually, and it would say name, and then the next one over would say name. So you don't always want to keep adding your columns at the beginning of every macro. You might want to just set up your columns in one macro and then later add data or take away data over and over. So let's go ahead and try this new one and add a secondary column. So I'm going to hit F8, 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 and you see that we now have one called last. So we have the first name field and the last name field. All right, so like I said, that was going to be a really brief lecture. Now we're going to deal with the secret item identifier that's called the HITEM. It's that number that is assigned whenever you create a new row, and it's the secret of how to manipulate reading and writing different cells within your new grid. Now we get to talk about the secret item identifier that each row is assigned whenever you create a new row, or item as they're called in the ExGrid. So the row or item identifier is a random long integer. So it's not going to be like 1 and then 2 and then 3 and then 4 like it is in Excel. It's going to be this big random number. But they're always going to be unique no matter how many that you have. So let's show you how this works and how you can trap and utilize the item ID. And so as we add more than one column and more than one cell information on the same row or item, how we can manipulate those. All right, let's dive in. Alt F11, open the Visual Basic Editor. All right, so we're going to create another macro here, sub, spacebar. This one I'm going to call rows for multiple columns, so multi-calls, something like this. And so what we're going to do in here, first of all, this is another concept that you may already be familiar with in Excel and using Visual Basic, but whenever you're going to do multiple commands to the same thing, in this case the items, you can actually use a with end with statement. So I'm going to type the word with, and I'll show you what this means. So in regards to, let's say, sheet1.grid, so in the grid 1 dot items, remember items is rows. So in regard to the grid 1 on this sheet, in regards to its items, in regard to its rows, and then I'm going to go to the bottom and type end with. Okay, so everything inside of this with end with statement, these two areas here, anything I type in here already knows that I'm talking about grid 1 dot items. So I don't have to type sheet1.grid1.items. Anywhere in here, I don't have to retype that. I simply I'm going to hit tab and I'm going to hit the dot. And it automatically knows what I'm referring to. This is great shorthand, so you don't have to retype sheet1.grid1.items, sheet1.grid1.items over and over. All right, so we're going to do something. First of all, we can add an item, dot add item, but as you recall, the add item method creates not only a new item, a new row, but it also will give you the answer of what is the row number, the item ID for that row. What's the identifier? So let's trap that in a variable. You could use a variable like myvar or the letter I or the letter X. We'll use H because it's an H item. So H is going to be equal to sheet1.grid1.items dot add item, right? and then I'm going to use parentheses because I can't use a spacebar if I'm putting something on using the equal sign into a variable. It's just a rule in VBA. If you're using a method like the add item method, but you're taking information from that function and putting it into something, then you need to use parentheses. So add item, in this case, I'm going to use quotes, and I'm going to say Dan. So we're going to add an item with the name Dan. And then now that we have trapped the item ID for the new one that we just added into row H, or item number H, then we can use the sheet1.grid1.items dot CellValue. The CellValue method is just that. It gets you the value of whatever's in the cell of whatever item and whatever column that you want. So it's really powerful. So we're going to take the grid1.items.CellValue, open your parentheses, and you'll see some different parameters we can utilize. Number one, what is the item identifier, the item ID that we need for this row? You are correct if you said H, because we just trapped it in something called H. So that's going to be that big number that represents the row. Now I'm going to hit a comma. Now what is the column index that we need in order to assign the last name column? So if you said that the last name is probably, looks like it's column number 2, you'd be really close. But it's actually the index number of 1, and that's because the ExGrid uses a zero-based numbering system, or zero base or zero index, instead of a 1 base or 1 index numbering system. Okay, so that means that this is actually column 0, and then this is column 1, and if we had another one, it'd be column 2, and etc., instead of 1, 2, 3. All right, as long as you can remember that, smooth sailing. We'll review it plenty, don't worry. So the CellValue, here's the row. And then if we do the comma to get our IntelliSense there again, the column index number is going to be 1 for the last name field. And close your parentheses so we can say that CellValue for that exact cell is going to be equal to, and then put whatever last name you want for that one. So we've trapped the row number while simultaneously adding that new row, that new item. And then once we have the item number for that row, we can utilize that with a CellValue and tell it the column index that we want, and then tell it the exact value that you want to enter that. So let's try this out. I'm going to hit F8 a couple times. So the with part doesn't really do anything. It just starts the with, end with statement. So here we go. Once we add the item Dan over here, I'm going to hit F8, we simultaneously trapped the new item ID, which is 4765, blah, blah, blah. And then we can use that right here with the CellValue. If you hover over the CellValue of H, 1, that particular row in column 1, which is the last name field, you can hover over it. It says empty, but whenever I hit F8, you look over here, it puts the word strong into that cell. And if you hover back over here now, it verifies to your eyeballs that yes, that cell actually does have the word strong in it. Which, by the way, incidentally, this is how you can read, not only write information. If you have the item number that you need, you can read column 1 or 2 or 0 or whatever you need, and we'll be utilizing that really soon in a later lecture.